عاديات ضبحا فالموريات قدحا فالمغيرات صبحا فأثرن به نقعا فوسطن به جمعا إن الإنسان لربه لكنود وإنه على ذلك لشهيد وإنه لحب الخير لشديد أفلا يعلم إذا بعثر ما في القبور وحصل ما في الصدور إن ربهم بهم يومئذ لخبير صدق الله العظيم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Jazakallah khair for that beautiful recitation. Welcome to Ramadan Stars today. Inshallah, today we will pick up our discussion where Sister Javediya left off yesterday. We'll talk about why the people of Mecca preferred their babies and kids to spend the first few years of their lives in the open air of the desert. We'll also discuss how the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was almost left in Mecca while all the other babies and kids were taken, and how he came to live with Halima bint Abu Du'ayb and her husband Harith bin Abdul Uzza. So very appropriately, today's title is In the Shade of the Desert. The Prophet's time with Halima bint Abi Du'ayb. So before we begin the story of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and Halima, let's have a quick discussion, a quick chat on why the Arabs preferred for their children to spend the early part of their childhood in the desert. So listeners, kids and adults alike, I'll ask you this question first. Why do you think that was? Why send your little baby who has just been born or a little kid to away from you, from Mecca, from the city, and to let them go live in the desert for the first 3, possibly 4 years of their lives? Why do you think that was? Now, if you think it's because the city is crowded, the air is polluted, or it's not clean, or the language spoken isn't pure, there's a lot of slang, then you are absolutely correct. To put this in perspective, think of any big city you've been to, like New York City, Chicago, LA, and then compare that to the suburbs of any state. I'm thinking Long Island, pretty much any town in New Jersey, including Piscataway. When you compare the two, life in the desert versus life in the city, you realize that cities tend to be crowded. People live in smaller spaces. The streets are crowded with people. And generally, there's a rush to get things done, or there's a rush for people to be where they want to be. But it's the opposite in a relaxed suburb, right? People aren't usually rushing or even driving too fast. There are a lot more open air spaces, farms, parks. And this is precisely why the Arabs of Mecca would send their children to experience the life of the desert before returning back to their city of Mecca. Being close to nature relaxes us, and they understood that. It gives us clarity, it helps us think more and wonder more about the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The hustle and bustle of a city prevents us from doing that. And this is why the Quraysh had a special place in their heart for the lifestyle of the Bedouins, right? These Bedouins lived in the desert. Their life was simple, healthier, and freer. And they were honest people who didn't require much to live. Now, when the Rasul ﷺ was born, a caravan of wet nurses from the desert came to Mecca. And these were a group of people who would usually take every few years, they would take children, little kids and babies from their families, and they would adopt them for a very short period of time. They would nurse them by giving them their milk, and they would raise them in the desert. As you can see from the slide, Halima and the donkey, you see that there is a caravan of people going, and then you see a lady on a donkey. And um, this is, this is, it's quite possible that Halima um, looked like that on the donkey, that she had a donkey and it was, full of um, food and clothing. And so she traveled with her husband from where they used to live to Mecca. Now, Halima and her husband were the poorest from their clan, from their tribe. They're of the poorest families. And while they're going around, we'll go into her story in more detail later, inshallah, but just to give a synopsis, just to give a basic story, while they're going around Mecca, they're trying to see if they can adopt a baby for a short period of time. But no one wanted to give them their baby because they knew that they were, the poorest of their clan. And Halima came across Amina. Amina, the mother of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She saw Amina and she saw a young widow, whose husband had just died, and she thought to herself, if I take this baby Muhammad, um, there's a high chance that her mother cannot afford her services, that she won't be able to pay me. So she saw baby Muhammad, but she left him, and she continued on to the city of Mecca to different families. But at the end of the day, when no one would give their babies to Halima and her family, she realized that she would rather take baby Muhammad than go to her tribe back to the desert empty handed, because then it would mean that she doesn't have another baby for the next few years. And how would they get money and how would they survive? So she went back to Amina, and let's talk a little bit more about that. She went back to Amina. She's very desperate. And she says to her husband, why don't we just take this orphan? And now this is amazing because, yes, her intention for taking him is because she doesn't have any other, she doesn't want to return empty handed to her family. But also, it's beautiful because then her name, Halima, means someone who shows concern and compassion for others. And this is definitely part of her nature. She knew that it's possible she's not going to get any money or anything from this, but she thought we're being charitable and maybe we'll get something better, some ihsan, something better from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from this. So she has that pure intention. And when her husband hears that, he agrees with her. And so they go to Amina and they take baby Muhammad with them. The next slide shows you exactly where exactly where Halima lived in relation to Mecca. So Halima was from the Hawazin clan of Sa'ad ibn Bakr, and the Hawazin had settled east of Mecca, like you see over here. And they would travel all the way to Mecca here to get the babies and the little kids, and then they would go back, travel back. Now let's go on to the story of how everything actually took place. And it's a miraculous, beautiful story. And in the words of Halima herself, she says, and we have a narration in the books of Hadith, that Halima said, I left among the first group of women riding a female donkey. Our female donkey had become afflicted with bloody wounds. So, what does that mean? It means the journey was too much for that donkey, and the legs of the donkey were bleeding, and blood was coming out of them. And she said, I also brought along an old camel, but wallahi, it would not give even a little bit of milk. I just brought it along with me. So, why is that? Because it was a year of a drought. Everyone's animals were getting affected. And Halima, because of her financial situation, because her and her husband were poor to begin with, they were getting affected a lot by this. So people were going hungry to the point that they became very weak. She said, also with me was my son who did not sleep at night due to hunger. Now, this son was around the same age as Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So you can imagine a baby boy who's just maybe a month old or 2 months old, and he's not sleeping at night because he's so hungry. But she said she held on to hope. She had hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them something better. So after we arrived in Mecca, baby Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was presented to each one of us, and each one of us said, no, we don't want to take him. When I found no other child, I returned to him, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I took him. Wallahi, the only reason I took him was because I could not find any other infant. I said to my husband, I will take this orphan who is from the children of Abdul Muttalib. Perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will benefit us through him, and I will not return with my friends without having taken anything. And my husband said, you're correct. We should take him. It's a good decision. And so I took him and returned with him to the place where we had made camp. So now they're back on their way back to the desert, but they're staying the night somewhere else. They have a campsite. Wallahi, during the same evening that I brought him with me to the campsite, I was able to nurse him. I was able to give him milk. I was also able to give my own son milk, and that hasn't happened in a while. His father, meaning her husband, stood up beside the old camel we came with, and he touched it, and it was full of milk. So now the camel is full of milk also. So he gave me some milk, and I drank, and my husband drank some milk. And then my husband turned to me and said, oh, Halima, you do realize that we have a blessed boy with us. Allah has given us through that boy what we could have never hoped for. And later on, inshallah, when we're going over the lessons from this story, we'll see that sometimes we don't know where the blessing of Allah is going to come from, but it comes anyway. So Halima continues. She says, after all of us drank milk to our full, we spent a good night. We slept and we weren't hungry. And that was one of the first nights that they actually had something to drink. Then my friends and I set out for the return journey to our home. I mounted my donkey and I carried Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam with me. By the one who has the soul of Halima in his hand, I raced past the rest of the caravan. The women exclaimed, hold on for us. Is this the same female donkey that you set out with? What happened to its bloody wounds on the legs? And she said, yes, it's the same baby that I'm carrying upon this donkey, a blessed boy. So we continued our journey, and with the passing of every day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increased us in goodness. When we came home, the lands were afflicted with drought. Remember what we said earlier, that people were going hungry, that the crops weren't, there were no crops because there was a drought. It hadn't rained in a long time. So everyone is going through some kind of a hardship. She said everyone would send out their sheep to graze, but only Halima's sheep would come back and they would be full after grazing. They wouldn't be hungry anymore. And everyone in their tribe turned to Halima and her husband and they said, what is going on? Why are your sheep returning so full? And so people started to send their own sheep with Halima and her husband, with Halima and her husband's sheep. But guess what? What do you think happened when the sheep would go, people's sheep would go with Halima's sheep? Everyone's sheep would return and they would still be hungry except for Halima's sheep. And the way in which the Prophet ﷺ grew was very different from the way in which all the other children grew. And this is Halima continuing on with her story. She said he grew in a single day the normal growth of an entire year. That means he grew a couple of inches in one day, and she was so surprised. And she said when he was fully 2 years old, my husband and I took him to Mecca, and we said to his mother, now Halima is seeing that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is a very blessed boy, that life for them has completely changed, that in the beginning, she rejected him and everyone from her tribe rejected him. But because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meant for Halima to take him, she took him. And now she wants to keep him. He's 2 years old and some of the kids are returned when they're two. But when she went back to Mecca with her husband and Prophet Muhammad, she saw that some kind of a disease, some kind of an illness had spread, and it was contagious. And she went to Amina and she saw Amina was sick also. And she and her husband tried to convince Amina to send Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam back with them to the desert. And initially, Amina didn't want to send him back. She missed him and she wanted to keep him in Mecca with her. But then Halima said, you yourself are sick. So why don't you get better and then we can return him to you? And so Amina agreed. She said that makes sense. So she agreed. So Halima continues on with her story. She said, we took him back with us and he stayed with us for about 3 or 4 months. And then one day, while Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his brother, meaning Halima's son, they were playing behind the houses in the area among a group of small goats and sheep, that his brother, meaning Halima's son, suddenly came back racing to us. And he said, something has happened to my brother from Quraysh, meaning Muhammad. Two men, both wearing white, came to him, took him, and they made him lie down. And then they cut open his stomach. Now, Amina and Halima and her husband feared for the worst. They had already convinced Amina to send Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam back, and they, uh, because it was safer in the desert, and they thought something truly terrible has happened. So they ran back to where Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was, and they saw him, and they saw that the color of his face was just it was completely pale. It was completely white, as if he had seen something or gone through something really hard and difficult. She said, as soon as Muhammad saw us, he ran to us and he hugged us and he started crying. And she said, she turned to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and she said, what happened? What's wrong with you? Is everything okay? And he said, two men came to me. They made me lie down. They split open my chest and they put something in it. And then they they sewed it back up and everything was fine. So her husband turned to her and he said, something has happened and we can't keep Muhammad with us anymore because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So now they're truly a little bit scared as to what happened. Let's go into the detail of this story a little bit more. Now, if you know which angel, so we know from our story that it was two angels. If you know which of the angels actually took something out of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's heart and then put it back in there after washing it, please type the answer. Okay, so if you said that it was Jibreel alayhi salam, you are absolutely correct. So Anas ibn Malik, one of the companions of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his adulthood, he said that while the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was playing with some other boys, Jibreel alayhi salam came to him, took him, forced him to lie down, and split him open, meaning his chest, cut it open, while Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not sleeping or anything like that, but he's not feeling that pain. Jibreel alayhi salam extracted his heart, took out the heart, removed from it a blood clot, a dot, and said, this is the portion of shaitan in you, which shows that there is something that in all of us, there is something that makes us do something that is not pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Or maybe do something that we know is wrong, but we do it anyway, like teasing someone or hurting someone, and we do it anyway. But Jibreel alayhi salam took it out of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam's heart, that desire or that want to hurt someone because they hurt you. He took it out of his heart. He then washed the heart with Zamzam in a bowl made out of gold. He then joined the heart together and returned it to its place, and he sewed it up. And that's what the kids saw. And that's what Halima's son saw. And he returned and he ran to his mom and thinking that Muhammad has been killed. And that's why when Halima went back to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she saw that he was very pale because he had gone through a significant hardship. He had gone through something big, something difficult. And then Anas radiallahu anh continues and he says that I used to see the marks of that stitching on his chest. So later on, inshallah, in a few minutes, we'll talk about why this event was so significant. Okay. So going back to Halima and her husband. So her husband turned to her and he said, we have to return him. We don't want anything bad to happen to him because they don't know at this point what happened, right? And so they took him back to Amina. When Amina saw them, she wondered. She said, "You were just here a few months ago and you really wanted to keep him. Did something happen?" And they said, "No, nothing happened. We just, we thought he would be ready for you now. He's healthy. We're satisfied. And we thought this would be a good opportunity, a good time for you to just take him back." And she said, "No, something happened," because she knew how they really wanted to keep him in the desert. And she didn't leave them alone until they told her exactly what happened. And does anyone know her reaction to this story? Did she completely, totally get upset with them? Or was she relieved? What do you think happened? What was her reaction to the story? So when she heard them and she saw how scared they were, she said to them, "Wallahi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not put him in any kind of hardship. That I know since the day he was born, since the time he wasn't even born yet, I knew he would be a special boy, a special child. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not hurt him. And I have complete faith that he would not harm him." And that's incredible that she knows that about her son. And it's incredible that anyone who had an interaction with Prophet Muhammad, even as a child, they knew that he was someone very special. Okay. And what I want to do now is talk a little bit about the lessons and benefits from this story, this time with Halima and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because it's not just a story, right? It's an incredible story. It's beautiful to listen to, but there are some really amazing lessons that we can learn from this that we can apply in our own lives. So the first lesson, now I want you all to think about what can you get from this story? How can you get a point from the story, understand a point from the story that can help you in your own lives? And keeping that in mind, the first lesson that we can learn from this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses for us is the best. If we make dua for something and we ask our parents for it and nothing happens, what does that mean? So I want you to think about that and maybe type the answer. What do you think it means if you really want something, right? Let's say a toy or anything, and you ask your parents for it and they say, not right now or now's not a good time. And you think to yourself, I made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and I asked my parents, but I still didn't get it. What does that mean? Think about it. It means that Allah will give it to us when we're ready for it. Or it could also mean that Allah will give us something better than it. So, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses for us is the best. And I want you to remember that from today's discussion. What Allah chooses for us is the best. Think of Halima. She really wanted to adopt a different baby, right? She even saw Prophet Muhammad and she went back to other families. She visited other families, but no one would give her a baby. And she kept trying to get someone else. But in the end, it wasn't meant to be. She returned to Amina. She was meant to take to baby Muhammad. She was meant to take baby Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she took him because she had no other choice, right? But she also thought that maybe Allah subhanahu wa taala will put khair in it for her, and He did. It was the best experience for her and her family. So, going back to the question I asked you, if we make dua for something and ask our parents for it and nothing happens, what does that mean? It means we aren't ready to have it yet. It means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you something even better than it when the time is right. Okay? The second lesson that I thought of was that being in nature has its benefits. Going to the park or the backyard or even the balcony, just getting some fresh air, it's good for your body, right? It's good for your body and it's good for your mind. And finally, one of the most important points that we can understand from this story is that what happened what happened that day, the incident of the splitting of the Prophet's chest, was a clear proof that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam for a very important mission or job in this life. So that is one of the first miracles that happened that show us that Prophet Muhammad was the chosen one. That Prophet Muhammad was a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is a story that really takes away all doubt and just really shows us that Allah was getting him ready for prophethood. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted him to be pure, and he was getting him ready for what was going to happen later on in life. So with that, inshallah, we're going to end today's session. A couple of points. I'm going to be posting up some questions, and you have until 4 p.m. of tomorrow, 4 o'clock, to answer the questions. They're going to be based on what we went over today in our discussion. And I hope you found it beneficial, and I hope you had a good time and you enjoyed it. And inshallah, until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إذا زلزلت الأرض زلزالها وأخرجت الأرض أثقالها وقال الإنسان ما لها يومئذ تحدث أخبارها بأن ربك أوحى لها يومئذ يستر الناس أشتاتا ليروا أعمالهم فمن يعمل مثقال ذرة خيرا يره ومن يعمل مثقال ذرة شرا يره. صدق الله العظيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاح. حي على الصلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا